Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Anviti's Virtual Connect, because that's where all conversations have moved right now. And today I'm in conversation with Ariz Rizvi. He is the head of our health risk management team, and they're looking at consulting on multiple levels in the current scenario that we're in. Health has changed drastically, and what it means has changed drastically to organizations in the last few months, thanks to all of the stuff that's been happening around Corona and COVID-19. And now, as we look at getting back to work, as organizations have started filtering back in, Ariz, my question to you is, where are we right now? What does coming back to work mean? And what does the immediate future look like?
All right, so thank you, Shreya, for the kind introduction. And obviously, I agree with you that we are currently in challenging times. At this point in time, we are, perhaps at a crossroad that a lot of people are confused. A lot of people don't know, where things are going to be leading to. But having said all of that, one thing has clearly emerged, and that is that health will no longer be something that would just be limited to an employee engagement activity, but would now perhaps need to be spoken at a notch higher, perhaps at a more strategic level, from a more strategic risk management perspective than the regular employee engagement perspective and lens that it used to be so far looked at. So that's that. Of course, it'll come with its own challenges in terms of having to adapt with our entire mindset, with how, with regards to how we deal with workplace wellness. And I would say we are both in challenging times, but also I see that there is a lot of areas and opportunities where we could really start looking at doing meaningful work with our clients.
Great. So when you're looking and talking about workplace wellness, and like you just said, I think that has changed contextually, and we're in a cusp right now, or a transition that is around the corner. What do you think are the three most important things to think of from an employer standpoint as they start getting colleagues to come back into work, and as they continue, with business as usual? What are the things you think are most crucial to be thought about?
I think the first and the foremost thing is that you see, once business start firing again, it's not as if you're going to call employees or employees are going to turn up to work without any sense of apprehension and insecurities for their own well-being and safety. So I think the first thing that organizations need to do is to instill that sense of security, that they are, as an organization, are doing everything they can within their sphere to ensure that employees are going to be taken care of, from all perspectives, and including, from their health perspectives. That's number one. Number two, I think organizations would now need to have a little more rigor around, the processes that are around things like infection control, and those processes are continuously tested on an ongoing basis to ensure that there aren't any cracks that are falling, people are falling through those cracks. So that's second. And I think the third most important thing is that any sort of health interventions will have to be taken with a dose of realism and practicality. A lot of times, from a legacy point of view, a lot of programs were born out of gut feel of what organizations and employers felt is good for their employees. But I think now perhaps organizations will start adopting a ground-up approach to planning and implementing their wellness interventions that work. So I think these are the three broad areas, I think, where I see change happening.
I think that's very relevant, especially, if you're still unsure and unclear of what direction you need to take as somebody who's going to open up doors to business as usual, to actually consider and think about what is it that you could implement. And I think that's a great start. Connected to that are what I'm, trying to understand are the key areas that you need to think of, not just medium term, but long term as well, because There is no vaccine in sight. The number of cases continue to increase. So the current scenario is not seeming very short-lived. It seems more like a long haul. So what do you think are the key areas that need to be looked at long term?
I think from a productivity point of view, we will no longer be able to disconnect wellness interventions and productivity. So I think that discourse would need to be perhaps brought forward. How are employees being productive? How is that productivity being gauged? And if there are any kind of wellness and health related obstacles that are out there impacting productivity. So I think that is a new normal that, if we are going to continue working from home or we're going to be continuing working remotely, that's going to be an important issue. The other issue is, of course, both you and I, we've been working from home, and we're not stranger to the fact that it has its own, psychological and mental resilience impact as well. So I think the fact that man is a social animal, how are we able to, really bring the entire, element of social while still being, physically distant, how we are no longer socially distant. For some reason, I always feel that the word social distancing is a misnomer. So while physical distance is important, I think the social distancing needs to be bridged via technology or perhaps, any other interventions.
Yeah. Yes, Ariz, I mean, I completely agree with you. And I think that calls for a separate session entirely, because as we work through and as we realize, and this is what everybody who's working from home is saying to me, that their workload has suddenly gotten quadrupled.
Yes.
And people seem to be a lot more on calls and virtual space. And what you realize now is, before, if you were calling it digital suicide in terms of killing yourself with too much digital exposure, I think that is true now in the current context that we're in.
I mean, I'd like to give you an example, and it's very relevant, at least from my perspective, is that the paradigms that we have with regards to wellness interventions are still very strongly grounded with the fact that an employee comes to office, and therefore, those interventions would revolve around that. For example, ergonomics. So I was speaking to a client of mine, and we kept discussing how employees who are at home need to keep their workstations in a way which is ergonomically most desirable, and we were thinking of creating videos, etc. And then suddenly during that conversation, you call it epiphany. I just thought that why are we so hung up on just workstation related and workplace and how do you work on your laptop, etc.? Because when you're working at home, it's not as if very few of us are actually sitting on their places or spots of work for 7-8 hours. We're perhaps addressing a couple of queries, and we're getting up and perhaps seeing what's happening in the kitchen. There is a delivery guy who's coming, and then you're receiving those packets. You're cleaning your own house because such is the case right now. And there are other areas and mechanisms that are impacting your ergonomic and your postural health as well. And those also need to be discussed, because now we really are, sort of having a blended approach, domestic and professional, right? So I think those paradigms also, would need to evolve.
Which is so true, because, at least when I'm cooking, I usually have the laptop on next to the kitchen counter, and you're in the kitchen, and which is true, because what we don't realize is with a situation like this, there is complete seamlessness between work and life, because it's integrated so completely with each other. While there are no traffic woes, a lot of the other woes are piling on. And mental health, like I said, maybe we should do a separate session on that. Lots of toxicity in relationships. You share the same space with the same people for a long time, it tends to get to you. So all of that as well, which I'm thinking we will do a separate conversation on anyway. But I'll slightly pivot the conversation to try and look at it from the health needs that, colleagues and employees would have, and how can organizations keep that in mind as they build their strategies?
Right. Uh, so I think we'll have to phase this out in different stages. Of course, at this point in time, the most important thing that organizations can do and should emphasize is on the fact that their employees are safe from the current pandemic point of view, right? So following social or physical distancing, ensuring good hand hygiene, ensuring the fact that if there is any information that is being shared, that information is verified and is checked, double checked before it is forwarded on different social media platforms. It could be self-help tips and general rumors. So I think that is what is important at this point in time. Slowly, as situation sorts of starts coming back to a degree of normalcy that we've known before, we will then have to keep ourselves alive to the situation, and keep ourselves nimble and agile to be able to respond to the situation that is changing extremely dynamically. Um, there are there are challenges, no doubt. There is information challenge all around. Different states are doing different things, and employees are confused. Employers are confused as well in terms of how do we go out and provide the best care to our employees. And what we are doing within health risk management team is to really trying to bridge that asymmetry that exists, asymmetry of information, asymmetry to the lack of resources, access to resources. Um, and we're doing a lot of work there. We're working with a lot of our clients to bridge that and ensure that, we try and minimize the pain as much as possible for the employers and the employees, and of course ourselves and society at large.
I think that's so true because, as you were speaking about this, I just remember the fact that it's also not one size fits all. Because the same way you're saying, each state has a different approach, each organization has a different approach, and each industry will obviously have a different approach to the way they're going to deal with it, because the
Absolutely.
occupational hazards, the environment that people work in, the way people work, the transactions that they carry is so different from a bank to an office to a shop floor to a retail floor to a hospitality sector. I think the needs and desires of every single segment of the sector is so different. So tell us a little bit about that and about how organizations need to really now rethink the way their business as usual is formulated and structured anyway.
Yeah. That's an interesting question, and a good one at that. I think this is also going to give organization organizations a sense of getting to know their own businesses and the various risks that their businesses face. So far, most of the risk management practice has largely revolved around loss of business or monetary risks or social risks, right? Safety and security, crime, etc. Health risk has never been at the forefront. We've been working with organizations. So a large IT organization, for example, who we work very closely with, we did risk stratification of their entire employee base. And we realized that within their employee and human capital ecosystem itself, there were at least 4 to 5 different health risk sets, right? So there were a bunch of employees who were extremely high risk to a bunch of employees who were really not high risk, right? And therefore, like you very rightly said, that within one organization itself, we will have to create solutions that are apt for those, different risk groups. And to be able to do that, one, we will of course have to work with organizations very intimately. It will have to be a relationship of equal partnership and transparency. And I think I'm very personally very proud to say that for the organizations that we are working with, we've had that great working relationships, and it's leading to from great outcomes. In fact, when this particular organization started, they opened for business again, the return to work has been fairly seamless. But even before that happened, there was a month of intense planning and documentation and cold runs and hot runs that we did before we could actually be fairly certain that yeah, we're open for business. So I
That
think
is true because I remember working with you on the same one that you're talking about, and it takes a lot
that,
of time,
that
effort, energy, to actually formulate these practices and, to actually look at what needs to be done, not just from a strategic point of view, but if you have 4 different subtypes, then how do you communicate with each of them?
yeah,
Because
you're right.
communication needs, are also different, right? How do you talk about it with each segment and each sector? And if you look at any organization, you've got people coming from very diverse backgrounds, and they all have different mechanics of how they understand nuanced communication and all of that. So I think that's a very poignant note to actually sit back and think of how it's also very it also seems like a lot of energy and effort that you need to invest to make sure that, human lives that you're interacting with, because they are at stake, it's important for you to do the best possible. So Ariz, I think with that, I'm through with my conversation piece for this time around. Thank you so much. But I do want to get back to you and speak to you more about return to work, more about what the future holds, more about maybe industry segmented organizations and what they can look at in terms of strategies that they could implement. All of these in this series that we will continue to have. It was a pleasure talking to you, Ariz. Thank you so much for joining us on Anviti Virtual Connect. As always, great to hear your insights and great to talk to you.
Thank you, Shreya. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for this initiative. I think this is long required, and we'll continue partnering with you in future as well. So thank you.
Thank you.